Hi everybody. So now we're moving on to our next section of the class, and this is the self-esteem and self-verification section. And we're going to start off with self-esteem because this, is a class on the self, so it would be very strange to go through the entire class and never talk about self-esteem. So what is self-esteem? And I have just a basic definition here to start us off. So in the most basic terms, it's how a person feels about him or herself. Now, there's a lot of details to self-esteem, a lot of different ways to operationalize it. So that's the first thing I wanted to start off with was how do we kind of get a little bit less basic and start talking about the different types of self-esteem. So one question to think about is, and you can think about this for yourself, when you think of your self-esteem, do you feel like your self-esteem is pretty stable? Does it basically stay the same throughout the day, months, years, always kind of hovering around the same place? Or do you feel like your self-esteem is kind of ping-ponging up and down a little bit? Does it change day to day? Does it change hour to hour? Either one of those answers, if you say yes to one or yes to the other, you're right. It looks like there's two different types of self-esteem and two different ways to measure it. So that's our first little starting point here is trait versus state self-esteem. So a trait in general is something that is long-lasting, like a personality trait. So in this case, trait self-esteem is long-lasting, average level of self-esteem. And the idea is that, if you look across, perhaps months or years of a person's life and you measure their self-esteem again and again, you can look for reliability. How consistent is that self-esteem measure? And it looks for most people to be fairly consistent. There's going to be some ups and downs and some changes, but across the board, across months and years, some people will have generally higher self-esteem. Other people might have generally lower self-esteem. But then within that person, there is also this way of measuring state self-esteem. So momentary changes in self-esteem. And that can be, as we'll see, from a lot of different things. Maybe you're feeling overall pretty good about yourself, but then you don't do so well in the class and it really drops your self-esteem. Or you have an issue with a friend, or you have a breakup, get fired from a job. Or maybe you start dating somebody new and your self-esteem goes up. So lots of little life circumstances can definitely move our self-esteem up or down, and they could be big life events like what I'm talking about, but sometimes it's just little things too, right? Like sometimes somebody looks at you the wrong way, or you see something on social media and you feel like a little drop in your self-esteem, and that lasts for an hour and then you kind of go back to normal. So that's what I mean by that state level. Now, if we were in an in-person class, I would stop class right now and I would pass out papers so you guys could look at some different self-esteem scales. Since we're online, I posted those in Carmen in this week's module. So if you want to, before I go on, you could pause the video right here and go look at two of the measures. There's one that's called the Rosenberg self-esteem measure and another one that's just labeled the state self-esteem measure. And what I would recommend, what I would say if we were together in class is to look at both the instructions and then also look at the content of the questions because we're going to come back to that. So if you want to, you can do that now, and then I'm just going to keep going here. So the reason I posted those two is that the Rosenberg self-esteem scale is a very old, established, and well-used self-esteem scale. It's from 1965, and it is considered to be a trait self-esteem scale. So if you look at those instructions, there is nothing in the instructions that really specifies time. It just says, just in general, answer these questions. But if you look at the instructions from the state self-esteem scale, it's very specific. It's all caps, it's in bold, at this moment, right now, how are you feeling? And that's really as all they do oftentimes to differentiate between trait versus state self-esteem. They just ask sometimes even the same questions, but they either say, think about it overall, or think about it right here at this moment. So again, you can take a look at those scales. Now, another thing we can look at, now notice here I say multiple ways to assess trait self-esteem. So within this category of trait self-esteem, we can also get more specific. We can look at global versus domain-specific self-esteem. And I'm going to have some more scales to look at for that too. So global self-esteem is just how people think about themselves overall. If you look back at that Rosenberg self-esteem scale, you'll notice that the questions are kind of general. I feel like I'm a person of worth. That's not specifying anything to do with your physical appearance or academics or your family structure, anything like that. Nothing specific, just in general, I feel like I have worth. So that would be very global self-esteem. So again, Rosenberg, you can look back at for that. The Rosenberg self-esteem scale is the most frequently used scale. If anybody happens to be a research assistant and is working in a lab that has anything to do with self-esteem, I wouldn't be surprised if you've maybe seen this before, because people will throw this self-esteem scale in for a lot of research. Now, domain-specific is the other way to look at it. Now we're measuring people's level of self-esteem within particular dimensions or domains. So domain-specific meaning that maybe when it comes to intellect, intelligence, there might be some people who have very high self-esteem, but those same people might have much lower self-esteem when it comes to physical appearance, athletic ability, any number of things. And again, of course, for any individual person, that each domain might be a little bit different. So this is assuming something a little bit different from what the general self-esteem is looking at, the global self-esteem. So assuming that people can have different levels of self-esteem depending on what aspect they're focused on. So there's another interesting scale that I posted, Crocker's Contingencies of Self-Worth scale. Dr. Jennifer Crocker is a very well-known, well-respected researcher in self-psychology, and we're also very lucky to have her in our department. And among many other things that she's done, she has coined this Contingencies of Self-Worth scale. So again, if you want to, you can pause right now, take a look at that scale. Basically what she's done, using undergraduates to kind of help to create this scale, she's come up with 7 different categories where your self-worth might be based on that category. So there are categories like appearance, God's love, in other words, like kind of the religious, spiritual relationship you have with God, family, competition. So she has all these different categories, and then the idea is that depending on which categories you care about the most, your self-esteem would be contingent on or dependent on how you're doing in that part of your life. So if you care a lot about spirituality and you're struggling with your spirituality right now, then you probably would score low on that God's love category, and your self-esteem would also be lower because of that. There's a lot of articles out there. I have kind of a simple beginner one, so if anybody's curious and wants a little bit more information, you can certainly reach out to me about that. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and then we'll come back and do more.